That afternoon, the wind from the Ashley River carried the scent of salt and the distant sound of church bells. I stood in the middle of our family garden, the same place where my own wedding had once been held, and watched my mother sign the papers, giving our ancestral mansion to my ex-husband. No one noticed my hands trembling as the pen scratched across the page. Applause broke out, wine glasses clinked together. My mother turned to me with a calm smile. "Because you didn't know how to keep it the way he did." Those words were soft as the breeze, yet they tore apart the rest of my life. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't losing a house. I was about to lose the only thing I ever believed was mine, the truth about this family. I still remember clearly the last morning before I left Charleston. Rain came early, long cold drops falling on the marble steps I had run across countless times as a child. The salty smell from the Ashley River lingered, mixing with the scent of jasmine along the front hedge, a fragrance that once reminded me of childhood, of my father. But that day, it made me sick. Inside, my mother's heels struck the wooden floor in steady rhythm. She said nothing except one dry sentence. "If you want independence, then go. But don't come back asking for anything." My car rolled past the black iron gate where the name Hale curved in polished brass, gleaming under the rain. That name had once made me proud. Now it felt heavy, like a scar that would never fade. I drove for 4 hours through winding roads toward Savannah. The city promised nothing, only old buildings and the salty breath of the sea, but at least there, no one knew who I was. No one cared that I used to be Eleanor Hale's daughter or Nathan Hale's wife. I started over with a laptop, a few clothes, and 2 empty hands. The apartment I rented was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, its window overlooking an alley lined with oak trees. The walls were damp, the wooden floor creaked with every step, yet at night, when the streetlights cast their glow through the curtains, the room carried a strange feeling, lonely but peaceful. I began taking freelance jobs online, designing lighting for small stages, high school auditoriums, sometimes a local music show. The money wasn't much, but enough to survive. Every night, I sat by the window, listening to the trains passing by the harbor, and wondered what my father would think if he saw me now. Would he be sad to see his daughter like this? Or would he smile, because at last I had stepped out of the cage my mother built for years? My father died when I was 15, a sudden heart attack during a company meeting. At his funeral, my mother didn't shed a single tear. She held my hand tightly and said, "Eleanor Hale doesn't break down, and neither will you." From that day, I learned to hide my emotions, just like her. But maybe that was what turned me into the kind of person she despised most: soft, impractical, always dreaming of invisible things. Nathan entered my life at exactly that time. He was one of my mother's new employees, nearly 20 years younger than her, polite and gentle, with a way of making people feel seen. My mother liked him immediately. I, on the other hand, saw something exhausted yet gleaming in him: ambition, wrapped in perfect tenderness. I remember the first time he walked into my small design studio in Charleston's historic district. He looked at the stage lighting sketches spread across my desk and said, "It's a shame that ideas this beautiful are hidden in such a small room." I gave a faint smile. "My ideas aren't worth seeing unless they help sell houses." He laughed, that kind of laugh that makes you feel understood. After that, he began stopping by more often, bringing coffee, sometimes stories about work, sometimes to listen. My mother knew, and instead of objecting, she encouraged it. "At least you've chosen someone with direction," she said. "Not one of those dreamy artists around you." When I married him, I also married my mother's approval. That day, she was radiant, as if she were the one getting married. Holding Nathan's hand, she told everyone, "He's the future of Hale real estate." The words tightened my chest. No one mentioned me. At first, Nathan was gentle, thoughtful, as if he truly loved me. But over time, I realized he was changing, or maybe he never had. He started coming home late, smelling of unfamiliar perfume, talking about meetings with my mother, and whenever I asked, he smiled, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You're always too sensitive. She only sees me as a son." I believed him, until one night, when I saw his phone left on the table. A message flashed on the screen. If she finds out we signed the transfer earlier, she'll lose her mind. Don't worry, I'll handle Whitney. The sender was my mother. My mind went blank. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. The next morning, when I confronted her, she was calm like a manager correcting an employee who failed to meet a quota. Don't make a scene, Whitney. You don't understand bigger matters. Nathan stayed silent, eyes downcast, like a child who knew he'd done wrong but had no intention of making it right. I packed in silence. And that was how I left Charleston. The first months in Savannah, I lived like someone cut off from her own body. By day I worked. At night I stared at the yellow lights over the old rooftops, wondering if my mother ever thought of me. Probably not. She was busy rebuilding her empire with Nathan. They fit better than I ever realized. But time has its way. When pain settled, what remained wasn't hatred, but a cold clarity. I didn't need them. I could rebuild on my own. I started getting bigger projects, a small downtown theater, a lighting exhibition for the local museum. My reputation grew, slowly but surely. Then, one evening, while adjusting the lights for a small concert in Savannah, my phone vibrated. The name on the screen made my heart sink, Mother. 3 years without a single text or call. I had trained myself to believe that whatever tied us was long severed. Her voice was exactly the same, steady, not even slightly trembling. Whitney, come home. There's something you need to witness. In the background, a technician called my name to check the colors, but everything suddenly felt distant, blurred like fog. What is it, Mother? You'll see. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., at home. Her tone left no room for refusal. After hanging up, I stood still for a long time. Anger, fear, and curiosity mixed together. Logic told me not to go back. But another part of me, the part that always softened at the words, come home, betrayed me right then. That night, I couldn't sleep. I had tried so hard to bury the past, yet one phone call tore the wound open again. The next morning, I drove out of Savannah before sunrise. The road along the river twisted like a silver ribbon under the pale morning light. The closer I got to Charleston, the heavier the air became, as if every breath carried the scent of memory. I stopped in front of the Hale mansion in the late afternoon. The iron gate was unchanged, the magnolia trees on both sides taller now, their leaves blocking most of the sunlight. The gatekeeper opened it and bowed with an unreadable look. My mother stood on the marble steps, straight and composed in a dark blue dress. Her hair had more silver strands, but her eyes were still as sharp as the day I left. You're here, she said, her tone neither warm nor cold. You called, so I came, I answered. I expected at least an invitation inside or a polite question, but she turned and walked in, leaving me to follow quietly. The living room smelled of polished wood and candle wax. In the center stood a long table covered with a white cloth, on it a stack of documents and a gold-plated pen. I recognized several familiar faces from her circle of lawyers, and one man standing with his back to me, Nathan. He wore a gray suit and gave a faint smile. Whitney, it's been a long time. His voice was low still, that same polished, insincere tone I once loved. What is this about, Mother? She signaled to the lawyer to open the folder. Today, I officially sign over this estate to Nathan Hale, she said slowly, as if reading a declaration of honor. He deserves to carry on this family's name. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. A gust from the garden stirred the lace curtains. Suddenly, everything felt like a muted film scene. What about me? You chose to leave this house, Whitney. You're no longer part of the Hale lineage. What we're doing today is merely putting everything back where it belongs. I wanted to laugh, but my throat tightened. In my mind flashed the memory of my wedding day, Mother holding Nathan's hand, telling the guests, he's the future of Hale real estate. So this was it, that future, finally delivered. I turned to Nathan. You knew about this? He avoided my eyes and nodded slightly. She said this was the best way to keep the house. Keep it? I repeated, my voice cracking. Or erase me from it completely? One of the lawyers handed Mother the papers. She signed with a firm, unwavering stroke. When she set the pen down, she lifted her head and looked at me. You should be proud. At least the house stays in the hands of someone who was once your family. I heard the pen tap against the table, the shuffle of papers, the faint clinking of wine glasses in congratulation. All of it blended into a warped hum like water rushing in my ears. No one noticed I was still standing there, arms hanging, my palms icy, cold. Mother stepped closer. The familiar scent of her perfume filled the air between us. Whitney, don't look at me like that. This is a practical decision. You chose a different path. You live by art, by your own stage lights. I respect that. But Hale real estate is a legacy. And legacies need people who understand property value, not emotion. Have you ever thought, I said quietly, that value doesn't lie in the bricks, but in the people you crush to keep them standing? She smiled faintly. You speak like an artist, and that's exactly why you can't be an heir. I turned away, not wanting them to see the tears rising. Outside, the evening light spilled across the garden, golden as it had been on my wedding day. Laughter echoed from inside the house, mingling with birdsong shrill and cruel. I walked straight toward the back gate. Each step felt heavier. The cobblestone path beneath me was slick with dew, reflecting my warped shadow. By the riverbank, the wind picked up. Ripples spread across the water, reflecting the house behind me, the house that had once been my childhood, my love, the place I thought I belonged. Now it was nothing but a stranger's mansion, where the man I once loved and the mother I once admired were drinking to their victory. I wondered if someone above was testing how far I could endure. But in that moment, amid the salt air and rustling leaves, one thought flashed through me: if Mother could hand over that house to Nathan so easily, maybe it was never truly hers to begin with. Charleston rain came down suddenly, like a slap. I drove away with nothing but my wallet, a pair of low heels, and the lump still caught in my throat. Anger burned so hot my hands shook on the steering wheel. But within minutes, the sky opened up, wind lashed, and the wipers couldn't keep up with the sheets of rain. The riverside road darkened. Waves crashed against the bank, thunder rumbled far away, and the air filled with the sharp scent of salt and wet earth. I turned on the radio, wanting to hear something besides my own heartbeat. Every station hissed with static. Then the car jolted the engine, let out a hoarse whine, like a dying breath. I tried the ignition once, twice. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, then went out. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, breath fogging the rain-slick glass. In the distance, the city lights blurred like tears that refused to fall. I stepped out of the car. My thin coat was soaked in seconds. The road was empty, lined only with dark oaks bending in the wind. In that moment, I realized I had nowhere left to return to. The house behind me wasn't home anymore, and ahead was nothing but darkness. Headlights appeared in the distance. A worn pickup truck pulled over beside me, its engine rumbling through the rain. The window rolled down, and a man's voice called out steady. Without suspicion, "Car trouble?" "My car died," I said. "I don't know anything about engines." He shut off the engine and stepped out. "Good thing I've got my toolbox. Let me take a look." I moved aside, watching him lean over the hood, flashlight in hand, illuminating damp wires. Rain ran down his hair, glinting faintly under the dull yellow light. "Gas or diesel?" "Gas." "Did you hear anything strange before it died?" "I only heard my heart beating." He chuckled softly. "That's not a common answer." His smile was light, but his eyes carried experience. After about 15 minutes, he exhaled and closed the hood. "The engine's flooded. You can't drive it now. I can tow it to a nearby garage if you don't mind." I hesitated. Rain kept falling, sharp and cold. In Charleston, no one trusted strangers, especially a woman alone at night. But something in his gaze felt safe. I nodded. "I'm Reed," he said as he hooked the tow cable. "Reed Donovan." "Whitney," I murmured. "Miss Whitney, if I'm not mistaken, you're running from something." "Do you always read people that way?" "Only when they drive through a storm not knowing where they're going." Rain drummed against the windshield. Street lights stretched into soft ribbons of light. My anger slowly gave way to an aching emptiness. Reed stopped at a small riverside cafe, the only one still open. Inside, the air smelled of wet wood and coffee. We sat by the window, watching the rain pour outside. He ordered me a cappuccino and took his black coffee. "Do you usually rescue strangers in the rain?" I asked, half teasing. "No. Usually I only rescue things that are about to collapse." "Sounds more like a job than a philosophy." "Actually, both," he said with a faint smile. "I'm a structural engineer. My job is to keep buildings from falling apart." That caught my attention. In Charleston, the world of architectural preservation was small, and the name Donovan was familiar. "I've heard of you," I said slowly. "You worked for Hale Real Estate, didn't you?" His expression darkened slightly. "Yes, until they fired me." "For what reason?" "For refusing to alter records." He turned the cup in his hand, voice calm but eyes conflicted. "If I did, it would qualify as a legal heritage site, even though it didn't meet the requirements. I refused, so they got rid of me." "You're saying the Hale house didn't qualify?" "Didn't, and maybe worse." He looked at me carefully. "You're Eleanor Hale's daughter, aren't you?" I froze slightly. "You know my mother?" "Not personally, but I know her records." He set his cup down, leaning forward. "I think you should know that house doesn't fully belong to your family." "What are you talking about?" "I don't have the authority to make conclusions," he said quietly. "But from what I found in the city archives, the original ownership of that land belonged to another woman. Her name was erased from the records in 1954. I checked with the planning department, the original file is gone, as if someone wanted it gone." "Are you sure?" "Sure enough to lose my job over keeping a copy." He met my eyes. "I think you should see it." He opened his leather case and pulled out a worn envelope, edges damp from the rain. Inside were faded photocopies, land diagrams, signatures, official seals. In the corner of one page, I read a half-erased name, Margaret Linton. Below it, a handwritten note read, "Transferred to Hale Real Estate, 1,955. "I don't know if you plan to confront your mother," Reed said, "but when truth is buried, it finds a way to surface. And when it does, it's rarely gentle." "Why tell me this?" "Because I think you're the only one in that family who doesn't know." "If what you're saying is true," I whispered, "then everything I ever believed was a lie." Reed didn't answer. He poured me more coffee, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Sometimes, truth doesn't come to comfort us. It comes to break us so we can rebuild." I looked down at my hands. Between my fingers, still dusted with rain and grime, I could see the faint tremor thin as a thread. Outside, the wind carried the scent of river salt and damp earth, just like the night I left Charleston 3 years ago. Only this time, I wasn't running. Reed stood, leaving a business card on the table. "When you're ready, call. I still have the original files in a safe place." He smiled faintly and walked out into the mist, his figure fading beneath the golden light. I sat alone, listening to the wind sweep across the wooden porch. On the card, a small line read, "Reed Donovan, Structural Integrity Consultant." Just below, in handwriting, "Nothing truly stands unless it's built on truth." I folded the business card and slipped it into my coat pocket. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, pale dawn breaking through the lingering drizzle. In my hand was the stack of papers. Reed had left blurred photocopies, the ink faded in places, yet the name in the top right corner was still visible, Margaret Linton. A name completely unfamiliar, yet my heart pounded as if I had heard my own. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice hoarse, throat tight as if gripped by an invisible hand. "Positive," Reed said, his eyes steady on me. "I checked old tax records, zoning maps, even newspapers from that time. There's no mention of that land transfer anywhere in the city system. It was wiped clean." So, my grandfather either falsified the documents or had someone do it for him. But I doubt he acted alone. The words dropped into the silence like a stone breaking the still surface of a pond. I sat there, listening to the echo of my heartbeat in my own head. The Hale's legacy, honor. All those things Mother repeated whenever she spoke of family duty suddenly felt hollow, meaningless. Outside, the rain had stopped. The river breeze drifted across the porch, cool and damp with the scent of earth. I looked out onto the small street gleaming with puddles. Everything seemed hazy in the thin mist, as if the city itself was hiding something. "Can I see that copy?" Reed nodded and slid the envelope toward me. I kept it because I knew someone would need it someday. They thought that erasing the papers would erase the past too, but no one can completely erase the trace of land. I opened the envelope carefully and pulled out the pages. The type was printed in an old-fashioned font, the ink pale blue. I saw a date 1953 and a handwritten note, transferred to Hale Development Trust. Beneath the signature Margaret Linton, another name was written over it in a different ink, Harold W. Hale. If this is real, my mother never had the legal right to give that house to Nathan. "Correct," Reed said slowly. "On paper, the house belongs to Hale Real Estate, but if the original transfer is proven fraudulent, every following ownership record would be void." I gripped the edge of the paper until my fingers went white. Memories of that house rushed through me, the cherrywood spiral staircase, my father's study, the window seat where I used to sketch as a child. If that land once belonged to someone else, if it was built on deceit, then every memory I'd ever cherished carried the stain of someone else's loss. "Do you know anything else about this woman, Margaret Linton?" "Very little," Reed replied. According to the 1954 census, she lived in the northern suburbs. It says she left without notice after a fire at one of Hale Real Estate's old warehouses. After that, nothing. No trace of her in city records. I tilted my head slightly, a chill creeping down my spine. She disappeared? Practically. I tried tracking the Linton family line. Those still alive claimed no record of a Margaret. It's like she never existed. Whitney, the past only has value when it's told truthfully. Otherwise, people rewrite it to make it more convenient. Now I understood what more convenient really meant. I ran my fingers over the blurred ink on the documents, picturing that woman's face someone erased, stripped of both her name and her land so another family could build its reputation. A strange ache rose in me, both foreign and familiar, as though some invisible thread was pulling me toward her forgotten story, a story that might also be my own. Reed's voice was calm but firm. "I know this isn't easy, but if you want, I can help you dig further. Some original documents are still kept at the state archives. They can't be deleted without leaving traces." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I stayed silent once, and it cost me my career. I don't want to see someone else lose everything because others lied." I looked at him and saw in his eyes no pity, only a steady truth that felt both frightening and grounding. He believed what he said. We left the cafe as the city lights came on. On the drive back, Reed stopped near Wapu Bridge, where the dark river flowed under the thin crescent moon. He pointed toward the distance, where the Hale Mansion's lights shimmered faintly across the water. "See that? Beautiful, isn't it? But if its foundation was built on stolen bricks, it'll crumble sooner or later." I followed his gaze, shame and anger mixing in my chest. Mother had always said the Hale name was untarnishable. But if that reputation was built on the suffering of a woman erased from history, was it worth preserving at all? Reed drove me back to the small hotel where I was staying. Before I got out, he said, "I'll send you the state archive address and a list of what I found. There might still be traces of Linton there, but be careful. If your mother learns what you're digging into, she won't stay quiet." I nodded and shut the door. The red glow of his taillights faded down the street. That night, I spread the papers across the table, staring at each line, the smell of old paper mixed with the damp scent of rain. I traced the signature Margaret Linton, elegant, slanted, the handwriting of someone who once believed in justice. I wondered what she had endured, and why no one had spoken for her. In that question, I saw myself. I opened the public archive site and typed Margaret Linton. Hundreds of results appeared, but only one matched an old, faded newspaper article dated June 23, 1954, "Fire at Old Hale Development Warehouse. One woman believed to have been inside but not yet found." I scrolled down. The last lines were cut off, no follow-up, no investigation. In the faint sound of leftover rain outside my window, I could almost hear the woman's breath, soft but steady, as if whispering that I couldn't stop now. Sometimes, a single revealed truth can collapse an entire life, like a house without a foundation. But I knew I had no choice. I couldn't let another woman's past be buried again, nor allow another generation to wear that theft as their legacy. The Charleston City Library sat on a small street shaded by old oak trees, where every afternoon sunlight filtered through the branches and painted pale gold across the marble steps. The building was quiet, timeless, still carrying the scent of aged paper, dust, and the faint salt of the southern coast. I pushed open the heavy door. The hinges creaked like an old greeting. The elderly librarian looked up, glasses slipping down his nose, and asked softly, "What are you looking for, Miss Hale?" I hesitated. That surname Hale sounded foreign now. Once it had been my pride, now it only tightened my chest. "I'm looking for archival records on a woman named Margaret Linton. She lived in Charleston, around the 1950s. He nodded gently and pointed toward a row of dark wooden cabinets at the back. "Civil and land records before 1960 are in the old archive room, basement level. You can search them yourself, but you'll need to fill out a request form. If you need the originals, I'll unlock the vault." I signed my name, the pen shaking slightly, then held the small slip of paper. As I walked down, it felt like descending into another layer of the past, where dust and shadows mingled. The staircase was narrow and steep, the air damp, the flickering fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I pulled up a chair before the rows of steel cabinets, each stuffed with numbered files. After more than an hour of searching, I found it: Linton, Margaret E., file number 27B, divided by 1953. The folder was thin, the pages yellowed, but the type was still legible. Under population notes it read, "Owner of property lot 41, Riverside Drive revoked due to lack of legal certification after the fire on July 12, 1954. Last resident, Margaret Linton, female, mixed European and African descent, 32 years old. New address, unknown." It was a small detail, but in my mind, my father's face appeared. Darker skin than my mother's. Amber eyes I'd always thought were a random inheritance from somewhere distant. I opened the next file. Inside was an old photograph, its silver edges frayed. A tall woman in a light-colored dress stood gracefully, her features delicate, her eyes deep and bright. Just below her right eye was a small mole, faint, distinct, in the exact spot my father had one. My heart pounded so hard I had to set the photo down to steady myself. "No, it can't be," I whispered, my hands trembling. I looked back at the caption. Photo taken at Hale Development Planning Meeting, 1953. Image provided by Harold W. Hale. My grandfather. It felt as though the floor shifted beneath me. If she was mixed race, if my grandfather had signed her land records, and if my father bore her features, then what did that mean? My grandfather took land from the very woman he'd had a child with? I opened more documents. Riverside project plans from 1954, compensation lists after the fire. Only one handwritten note stood out, left voluntarily. The woman had been erased, robbed, and the record even claimed she chose to leave. On the final page, a red stamp read, "Closed case, 1955, signed Eleanor W. Hale." My mother. So she knew. She didn't know she inherited the sin. I left the library as the sky turned bronze. My footsteps echoed against the stone pavement. Across the street, the river wind rose, carrying salt and the distant sound of church bells. I stopped on the bridge, staring down at the rushing water below, the same water that had reflected generations of Hales, who prided themselves on being symbols of integrity. "Integrity," I muttered, a bitter laugh escaping me. My phone buzzed. A message from Reed. I found the address of Linton's old home, in Avondale. But it's now a warehouse owned by Hale Real Estate. How could my mother bury everything and live peacefully in a house built on another woman's injustice? I drove to Avondale as night fell. The warehouse stood behind mangrove trees, its metal doors rusted. The sign, Hale Real Estate, storage property faintly glowing under the streetlight. I parked and stepped out. The main door was locked, but there was an old side entrance, the padlock corroded. A gust of wind blew as I pushed it open. The smell of burnt wood, old paint, and mildew filled my lungs. Inside, it was dark, light leaking only through cracks in the walls. I turned on my phone flashlight, tracing the dusty surfaces. One corner bore black smoke stains, remnants of the mysterious fire from 1954. I touched the wall lightly. The dust fell away, revealing faint chalk writing beneath. The letters were shaky but still readable. "No one can steal what runs in the blood." Reed's voice came from behind me, making me jump. "You shouldn't have come here alone. You followed me?" "No, I guessed you would." He shone the light on the words. We both stayed silent. "Someone wrote it after the fire," he said quietly. "The police ruled it an electrical short. But in the report I read, the wiring had been inspected 2 weeks before, perfectly fine." "You mean the fire was staged?" "Most likely. And if that's true, there was only one purpose: to erase evidence. And the person who ordered it could have been my grandfather." Reed gave a small nod, saying nothing. "Reed," I said, my voice low, "if Margaret Linton truly had a connection to my family, if she was the one robbed, then I need to know everything. Not to clear her name, but to understand who I am. Are you sure about that?" "I've lived in lies long enough." I looked up at the pitch-black sky, wondering if my father had ever known this truth, or if he, too, had been a victim of the secret buried inside the name Hale. A thought began to form in my mind. I would go back there not as a daughter, but as someone demanding justice for the woman buried beneath my family's guilt. Charleston was unusually cold that day, the sky the color of ash, as if covered by a film of old memory. I drove down the familiar road leading to the Hale estate, a mix of bitterness and distance rising in my chest. 3 years and one lie spanning half a century, all now sealed inside the envelope on the passenger seat. Inside it was proof. Truth. The wound I was about to force my family to face. The iron gates were open as always, the garden lights blazing. The Hale mansion had never lost its elegance: white walls, arched windows, the rose vines curling up the second-floor balcony. But tonight, that light no longer looked peaceful. It glared with artificial perfection, as if the house itself were trying to hide the darkness within. I stepped out of the car, my heels clicking evenly against the rain-slick stones. The door opened the moment I touched the handle. The scent of candles, wine, and expensive perfume mingled in the air, the smell I had always associated with prestige. "Whitney." My mother's voice echoed down the hall, calm, unsurprised. She stood at the far end, with Nathan beside her, still in his polished suit, his face unchanged, his eyes sharp with quiet suspicion. I walked straight into the dining room. It was exactly as I remembered: the long mahogany table, the crystal chandelier, the 3 chairs perfectly arranged. A servant placed a glass of wine in front of me, his hesitation visible. I shook my head gently. Mother sat at the head of the table, Nathan to her right, and I across from them. It might have looked like a normal family dinner, except for the brown folder I set down in the center. "What's this about?" Nathan asked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "A dinner," I said slowly, "to talk about a truth this family has hidden for 70 years. The air changed instantly. Mother set her glass down. The faint clink of crystal sounded like metal striking. "Whitney, what are you doing?" "What you should have done long ago." I opened the folder. Yellowed pages, faded ink, a photograph of a biracial woman with bright eyes and a small mole beneath her right eye. This house never belonged to the Hale family. It once belonged to a woman named Margaret Linton. She was forced to leave after the fire in 1954, a fire listed as an electrical accident, but actually staged by Hale Development to erase evidence of a land seizure. Nathan laughed, a dry sound slicing through the quiet. "Where did you get this? Some kind of novel plot? Who would believe it?" "I have proof." I pressed play on my phone. Reed's voice came through, clear and steady, every word slicing the air like a blade. The original deed was in the name of Margaret Linton, unlawfully transferred to Hale Development in 1954. I possess complete copies, signatures, seals, everything. All subsequent records were altered by Eleanor Hale in 1993. Nathan's smirk faltered. He glanced at my mother. Her face was motionless, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the papers before her. "Where did you hear this?" she asked, her voice rasping slightly. "From someone your company fired for keeping evidence, and I found the original photo in the city archive." I pushed the picture toward her. "This is Margaret Linton. The woman our grandfather betrayed, the one erased from history so this house could exist." Mother's hands trembled as she looked at it. Then she lifted her gaze, regaining that practiced calm. "You don't understand, Whitney. That was a long time ago. We only protected what was ours." "Ours?" I repeated. "Are you sure about that?" "Without him, there would be no Hale real estate, no legacy. Without him, there also wouldn't be a woman erased, a child denied, and maybe no father for me at all." "Whitney, what are you saying?" I looked straight at him. My father had a mole under his right eye, the same as the woman in that photo. "Don't you want to know why?" Mother shot up from her chair. "Enough." But I didn't stop. Grandfather had a child with Margaret Linton. That child was my father. And instead of admitting it, he stole her land and changed his son's name to bury the scandal. This house, Mother, it was built on sin. Mother staggered back, her lips trembling. I saw her eyes flicker, her strength faltering. She sank back into the chair, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I've tried to bury that for 30 years. The words were barely audible, but they crashed inside me like thunder. "I didn't want you to know. I wanted to keep this family intact at any cost." "And you thought giving the house to an outsider would help?" "Nathan isn't an outsider," she said weakly. "He understands how to protect what we've built. He understands how to protect the Hale name, not the truth." Nathan's lips curved. "What truth? A few old papers and a recording from a bitter ex-employee? You think that's enough to bring down this family?" I pulled another envelope from my coat pocket and dropped it onto the table. "Enough to start an investigation into Hale real estate. I've already sent copies of the records to the state archive. They're verifying the signatures. If you're smart, Nathan, you'll decide which side you're on before this house falls." "Whitney, you don't understand. This house is my entire life. Everything I did for you, for your father. If this truth comes out, the family's name will be ruined." "Our name?" I scoffed. "You traded a woman's justice for that name. Do you know what I found at the old Hale warehouse? A half-burned wall with chalk words that said, 'No one can steal what runs in the blood.'" For the first time, I saw true fear in her eyes, something I'd never seen in that iron-willed woman. "What do you plan to do with all this?" "I'm going to bring it to light. Not to destroy you, but to give justice to the woman buried because of our family. And if you really want to save this family's reputation, start by telling the truth." Mother reached out, touching the photo gently, her hand trembling. "I remember her," she whispered. "I saw her once, when I was little." She stood at the gate, looking at this house. My mother drove her away, and he said nothing. "Maybe you're right, Whitney. Maybe everything I've been protecting is a mask." Nathan stayed silent. I looked at my mother, and in her eyes, I saw something collapse and something release. "I want to hear everything," I said softly. "Not to accuse, but to understand. Tell me what really happened back then." I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, the sound of my heels steady against the rain-slick stone path. The door opened the moment my hand touched the handle. The scent of candles, wine, and expensive perfume blended together, a smell I had associated with the word prestige since childhood. "Whitney, you actually came," my mother said. "I thought you'd avoid me." "I avoid liars, not the truth." I walked straight into the dining room. The same familiar space, the long, mahogany table, the shimmering crystal chandelier. 3 chairs still perfectly arranged. A servant placed a glass of wine in front of me, hesitation flickering in his eyes. I gave a slight shake of my head. Everything looked like a normal family dinner except for the brown folder I laid in the center of the table. "What's this?" Nathan asked, a faint smile forming on his lips. "A dinner," I said slowly, "to talk about the truth this family has hidden for 70 years. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Mother set her wineglass down. The soft clink sounded sharp as metal. "Whitney, what are you doing?" "What you should have done long ago." I opened the folder. Yellowed papers, faded ink, and a photograph of a biracial woman with bright eyes and a small mole under her right eye. "This house," I began, "never truly belonged to the Hale family. It once belonged to a woman named Margaret Linton. She was forced out after the fire in 1954, a fire that the report called an electrical short. But in truth, it was started by people from Hale Development to erase evidence of a land seizure." Nathan laughed. "Where did you get this? Sounds like a cheap novel. Who's going to believe that?" "I have proof." I unlocked my phone and played a recording. Reed's voice came through clear and steady, every word sharp as a blade slicing through air. The original land deed was under the name Margaret Linton, illegally transferred to Hale Development in 1954. I possessed the complete copies, including signatures and seals. All later records were altered by Eleanor Hale in 1993. Nathan glanced at my mother, the confidence fading from his face. Mother said nothing. She sat motionless, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the documents in front of her. "Where did you hear that?" she asked. "From someone your company fired for keeping the evidence. And I found the original photo in the city archives." I slid the photograph toward her. "This is Margaret Linton, the woman our grandfather betrayed, the one erased from history so this house could exist." Mother's hands trembled for an instant. Then she looked up, her expression gradually regaining composure. "You don't understand, Whitney. That was a long time ago. Our family only protected what was ours." "Ours?" I repeated. "Are you sure about that?" "Your grandfather built everything. Without him, there would be no Hale real estate, no legacy." "Without him?" I cut in. "There also wouldn't be a woman erased, a child denied, and maybe no father for me." The room fell silent. Only the sound of rain outside remained, steady as time tapping on glass. "Whitney," Nathan said softly, suspicion in his tone. "What are you saying?" I met his gaze, unwavering. My father had a mole beneath his right eye, exactly like the woman in this photo. "Do you want to know why?" Mother shot up from her chair, her voice higher than usual. "Enough." But I didn't stop. "Grandfather had a child with Margaret Linton. That child was my father. And instead of acknowledging him, he stole her land and changed his son's name to bury the shame. This house, Mother, it was built on sin." Mother stepped back, her lips trembling. I saw her eyes flicker, then dim, her strength draining away. She sank into the chair, hand to her forehead. "I've tried to bury that for 30 years. The words were so faint I barely heard them, but they thundered in my head. "I didn't want you to know. I wanted to keep this family intact at any cost." I looked at her for a long moment. "And you thought giving this house to an outsider would help?" "Nathan isn't an outsider," she said weakly. "He understands how to protect the legacy better than you. He understands how to protect the Hale name, not the truth." Nathan smirked. "What truth? A few old papers and a recording from a bitter ex-employee? You really think that's enough to destroy this family?" I pulled another envelope from my coat pocket and dropped it onto the table. "Enough to get Hale real estate investigated. I've already sent copies of the documents to the state archive. They're verifying the signatures. If you're smart, Nathan, you'll decide whose side you're on before everything collapses." He went quiet. His face hardened, his eyes flicking toward my mother. Eleanor shook her head slightly, as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. The room felt suddenly heavy, suffocating. "Whitney," my mother said after a long pause, her voice low and tired. "You don't understand. This house is my entire life. Everything I've done, it's always been for you, for your father. If this truth comes out, the family's reputation will be ruined." "Reputation?" I scoffed. You traded a woman's justice for that reputation. Do you know what I found at the old Hale real estate warehouse? A burned wall with chalk writing that said, "No one can steal what runs in the blood." Mother lifted her head. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes, something rare in that iron-willed woman. What are you going to do with all this? I'm bringing it to light. Not to destroy you, but to give justice to the woman buried by our family's lies. And if you really want to save this name, start by telling the truth. Mother looked at me for a long time, then reached out and gently touched the photograph on the table, her hand shaking. I remember her, she whispered. I saw her once when I was a little girl. She stood at the gate, looking at this house. My mother drove her away. And he said nothing. Maybe you're right, Whitney. Maybe everything I've been protecting is just a mask. Nathan sat silently, not daring to interrupt. I looked at my mother, seeing something in her eyes, something collapsing and freeing all at once. I want to hear it all, I said softly. Not to accuse, but to understand. Tell me what happened that year. She closed her eyes and sighed. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. Outside, the rain began to fall harder. That night, Charleston looked like a watercolor painting, blurred by reflections. Streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, stretching into pale ribbons. I drove through the silence, my mind heavy as if I'd lost both my past and my future. Not because of the house, but because of my mother, the woman I once believed, no matter her flaws, would never turn her back on her daughter. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. Charleston Court, notice of lawsuit. Eleanor Hale and Nathan Hale have filed a suit against Whitney Hale for defamation and damage to reputation. I sat motionless in the small rented room on Market Street, the sounds of cars and voices drifting in from outside. I called Reed. He answered after 2 rings. I'm guessing she made her move, he said, his voice hoarse but unsurprised. She and Nathan are suing me for defamation. Of course, they can't let you go further. But we can't stay still either. That afternoon, we met at the Riverside Cafe, the same place where I first heard about Margaret Linton. Reed sat across from me, his laptop open beside a thick stack of files. I've been preparing for this, he said. I have complete copies from the state archive signatures, notary seals, fire investigation reports. Plus, statements from 2 former employees of Hale Real Estate from that time they're willing to testify. You've done all this. Since when? Since I saw you walk into that warehouse. You're not like the rest of them. I knew if the truth reached you, you wouldn't bury it. Reed placed a small silver USB drive in front of me. This contains a recording I saved from Hale Real Estate's internal system before I was fired. Eleanor Hale personally ordered the falsification of the heritage certificate. We'll send this to the attorney and the press. If my mother gets investigated, she'll lose everything. And what will you lose? Only my name. And I lost that a long time ago. On weeks later, on the first day of the trial, reporters, cameras, and journalists crowded every inch in front of the courthouse. On the digital board, the headlines scrolled nonstop. Legacy scandal. The Hale family accused of land seizure in 1954. Mother walked in, still carrying her proud posture. Not a single strand of hair out of place. Nathan walked beside her, his face as cold as stone. I stood across the hall, no longer Eleanor Hale's daughter, a woman holding a stack of old papers and the resolve not to back down. My mother's attorney began with a long defense, his deep, steady voice sounding like a hymn to power. My client is the guardian of a legacy. All accusations are unfounded, built on misunderstandings and unauthenticated documents. When it was our turn, Reed opened his laptop and projected onto the courtroom screen the recordings, the old land maps, and the photograph of Margaret Linton. A voice in the recording said, "We can't make Margaret Linton's name public. If we do, the Hales will lose the entire property. Fix the records now." The voice was my mother's. Nathan lowered his head, avoiding the journalist's eyes. My mother sat still, lips pressed tight, eyes closed for a brief second as if she already knew how it would end. The trial lasted 4 days. On the 5th, the judge declared, The property at 41 Riverside Drive is determined to legally belong to the direct descendant of Margaret Linton, who is proven through extramarital lineage to Harold W. Hale. The judge lifted his eyes toward me. According to the DNA results, that person is you, Whitney Hale. When I stepped out of the courthouse, hundreds of camera flashes went off. But I saw nothing except the Charleston sky, startlingly clear and blue. That afternoon, I returned to the house that had once symbolized power, now hollow and silent. The white-painted walls, the polished wood floors, the furniture sealed under protective wraps. I walked through the hallway and touched the banister where, as a child, I used to swing my legs listening to my father's stories. In the living room, the family portraits still hung, my grandparents, my parents, and me as a child. Reed came in quietly, standing behind me. "Do you want to keep the house?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "I don't need a house built on lies. But I'll preserve it so no one else can be erased from history for the sake of someone else's reputation." Then I whispered, mostly to myself, "Thank you, Mother. If it weren't for you, I might never have known where I truly belonged." I spent many mornings in the empty house, walking through the quiet corridors where even footsteps echoed softly. Reed came often now, without the cautious distance he once had. He helped me restore the back garden, the one my mother had abandoned, saying it had no real value. He replaced the railings, I repainted the windows. Amid the hammering, the brush strokes, and the smell of new wood, we grew closer without needing many words. One afternoon, as I was cleaning an old picture frame of my father, Reed paused his work and asked quietly, "Are you planning to keep this house forever? Keep it for what?" I didn't want it to become a trophy, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it either, because if Margaret Linton were still alive, she probably wouldn't want a grand mansion only to be remembered. When I said that, a strange calm spread through me, as if the last missing piece of a long puzzle had finally fallen into place. Reed looked at me, his smile soft as the moonlight that night. "If you really do it, I'll help. I owe you that, and maybe I owe myself too." I smiled. "No, Reed. Neither of us owes anything anymore. We're paying a debt to the past." In the following weeks, I began contacting the state's heritage preservation organizations to get approval for the project. No one objected, maybe because no one dared to challenge a story the whole city already knew. News of the Linton Hale legacy trial still appeared on the front pages. And for the first time, the Hale name was mentioned not for its power, but for an act of historical apology. I sold half the property, the rear section facing the river, which had once been the guest house, and used that money to restore the main house. Reed handled the structural design, while I personally selected every plank of wood, every frame, every plaque for the exhibition rooms. I insisted on keeping the scorched bricks from the fire, sealing them behind glass with a brass plaque beneath that read, "True legacy isn't what's left behind, but what cannot be erased." Months later, when life had grown quieter, I received a small envelope with no return address, familiar handwriting. It was from my mother. Inside was a short note, written in the handwriting I had memorized since childhood. "Whitney, I gave the house to the wrong person. I hope you'll give it to the right history. I don't ask for forgiveness, only to be understood." Beneath it was an old photograph, my father young, standing beside my mother, the Hale house behind them still unpainted, faint smoke stains visible on the walls. My mother looked at the camera, her smile thin as the last light of day. I placed the letter in a glass frame and hung it in the main hall where the morning sun streamed through the round window, casting a pale glow over the ivory wall. Beneath the frame I wrote in chalk, "For Mother who taught me that silence can sometimes be a kind of courage." That afternoon, I walked down the hallway, gazing at the newly hung photos. One wall for the Lintons, one for the Hales, two names, two stories, now sharing the same space. No more boundaries, no more winners or losers. Reed stood by the doorway, leaning against the wooden frame. "You did it," he said, a quiet smile crossing his face. We walked into the garden. Autumn had begun. The first leaves fell onto the grass, soft as the greeting of a new season. I looked back at the house, its red roof glowing under the sunset, and felt a peace I had never known. For the first time in my life, I felt free not because I had reclaimed something, but because I had learned to let go. And when Reed gently took my hand in the wind-filled courtyard, I knew that loss, when faced with courage, could become the beginning of something tender. That morning, sunlight poured through the old magnolia trees of Charleston, lighting the wooden porch where Reed and I stood. The river breeze carried the salt air and the laughter of children playing in the garden below. I leaned against the railing, watching the kids run around the small stone statue in the yard, the one engraved with Margaret Linton in bright brass letters. A curly-haired girl stopped and looked up at the name, asking her grandmother, "Grandma, who was Mrs. Linton?" "She was the woman who taught this whole city what courage means, sweetheart." Reed stepped out from the door, holding 2 cups of coffee, the steam curling into thin white ribbons. He handed one to me, his smile gentle, the kind that belongs to someone who's learned how to stay without needing to possess. "Up earlier than the sun again," he teased. "I don't want to miss the morning here," I said. "Every day the light hits a different corner of the wall. It's like the house is alive, breathing." "It really has changed, Whitney. It's no longer the Hale mansion, and not a museum. It feels like a memory that's been healed," I finished for him. Reed looked at me, his eyes reflecting the clear blue sky. "You know," he said softly, "I never really believed in justice. Not until I met you." I laughed quietly, genuinely. "Justice doesn't need anyone's belief, Reed. It only needs someone brave enough to start." He didn't respond, but I knew he understood. Everything we had endured, the trials, the losses, the betrayals, the sleepless nights, had led to this moment, when I could stand in the old house and no longer feel its weight. I looked up at the wall in the hall where my mother's letter hung. The morning light streamed through the glass, making the slanted handwriting seem almost alive. "I gave the house to the wrong person. I hope you'll give it to the right history." "She left the company and moved to the suburbs," I said quietly. "But last month, she sent me a card. Just 2 words, 'I understand.' And you believe her?" I smiled, my gaze turning toward the river. "I believe some things don't need to be proven. Maybe she doesn't need my forgiveness, only for me to understand that love sometimes is another form of fear." A soft silence lingered between us. The wind from the river lifted my hair, and Reed reached up to gently brush a few strands from my cheek. The gesture was so natural, I didn't even think to pull away. "Will you stay here?" he asked, his voice low. I turned to him, meeting the smile in his eyes, the smile of a man who had lost everything but still believed the truth was worth fighting for. "I think I will," I said. "But not to keep the house. To keep the story." He nodded, his gaze warm like the sunlight spilling across the porch. "I'll stay with you." We both looked toward the garden. A group of students were taking photos beneath the magnolia trees. In their laughter, I heard something the house had been missing for years' life. A little boy ran up to the base of the stairs, looked up at me, and asked loudly, "Ma'am, is this your house?" I bent down, smiling. "No, kiddo. It belongs to everyone now." The boy grinned and ran off. I watched him go, feeling something soften inside me. Maybe that was the moment I truly understood. I once thought they had stolen a house from me, but now I knew they had only handed me a past, so I could rebuild it, this time with truth. Reed placed his hand on my shoulder, and together we looked out at the open sky. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering golden fragments across the ground. In the distance, church bells rang, blending with the sound of gentle waves brushing the shore. I spoke softly, my voice carried by the wind. "Sometimes to find where you belong, you have to be brave enough to lose everything you once called yours." Before us, the Linton Hale Museum gleamed under the morning sun, no longer a symbol of power or lineage, but a quiet testament to something simpler. That truth, no matter how long it's been buried, always finds its way back, not to divide, but to heal. The wind stirred the white magnolia petals, sending them drifting down the steps, glimmering in the light. I watched them, feeling as if I, too, were dissolving into that morning, peaceful, weightless, and finally, free. Sometimes I still return to that porch, watching the sunlight fall through the magnolia branches, and I wonder maybe we have to lose everything before we truly know what's ours. This story isn't about a house, it's about the journey to rediscover truth and courage. If you've ever had to let go in order to begin again, I'd love to hear your story. Please like, follow, and subscribe so we can share more stories about faith, forgiveness, and the moments that make us stronger. Where are you watching from today?